Hello everyone, welcome to this talk. I thought I would just show myself so you know who's behind the slides, who's behind the voice, in case we meet at one of the virtual events here at DevDays, or at some point in the future, maybe out in the real world. Very much looking forward to that, like I think everybody else. Let me dive in on my talk here. I want to talk about FHIR and how we used it in the context of building web apps in response to COVID-19 and as part of an agile development process. My name is Morten Ernebjerg. I am a senior developer at Data for Life. We are a nonprofit company. We're supported by the Hasselplattner Foundation, which gives us a lot of independence in what we do. And together with partners, we work on patient-centered digital solutions. We have a strong focus on data security, and we also do work in the health research space. The context of all this was the sort of rapidly evolving COVID-19 spread, particularly in the spring here in Europe. I'm in Berlin. It was something that affected many aspects of our environment. In Germany, it went from being a disease that mainly affected travelers to something that was endemic. We learned a lot, obviously, about the disease and symptoms, for instance, the importance of loss of sense of smell as a marker. And the whole society responded to this, for instance, the guidelines, wearing a mask, and so on. And in this whole very dynamic situation, we jumped in with partners and tried to look at how we could make a contribution to respond to this. And the first thing we did was a symptom questionnaire app. It's called the COV app. I'll talk more about that later. The first version of that came out in mid of March. This is just before the sort of first round of strict restrictions in Germany were imposed. And following that, in April, we went on to develop a FHIR implementation guide that documented exactly the questions we were asking, the output format, the codings. And from kickoff to the actual release of that implementation guide was only about 25 days. Again, something that worked because we could collaborate with other knowledgeable people and really move things forward together. And further on in the spring, we then went on to work on other COVID-related apps, a symptom tracker and test delivery result app. So a lot of very intense development work for us in a very short period of time. And for that work, there were multiple aspects coming in, and certainly sort of certain tension between these different aspects. So there was on the one hand the incentive to move very fast. It was a quickly developing pandemic. There was a lot of new knowledge, new insight that could be incorporated into digital solutions developing. That in itself fit quite well with how we work, how we do development, so in very short cycles and incorporating changes quite quickly. On the other hand, it's of course about the well-being of human beings. So medical correctness is extremely important. Data privacy and security are also key components. So this is the urge to say, or the imperative to be careful. And part of that is, of course, also to do careful formatting of your data, to have clear specifications for what you're collecting, how you're encoding it, to make it readable to yourself, to make it understandable to others, to make it possible to transmit it, and to make it possible to be used for research later on. And really covering all those different aspects, I think, only worked because we were able to collaborate with some really great partners. For the COV app, for instance, we had on the medical side a collaboration with the Charité University Hospital in Berlin. They had the questionnaires, the knowledge about the symptoms. They had also some experience and ideas on how to use that in a digital setting. And we could bring in our development experience and capabilities, also experience with data privacy and security. And for the implementation guide, we were able to strike up a great collaboration with people from the German FHIR community, so coming with others from the Berlin Institute of Health and from the Molded Institute, also from the Health Innovation Hub here in Berlin. And that together then led to, on the one hand, the application itself, the COV app. Like I said, it's a questionnaire app. where you get the answers out in FHIR, and it's an open source app. You can go look at it on GitHub, and to document that and complementing that, we have a FHIR implementation guide. So obviously very focused on questionnaires with code system and value sets for the encodings. We were using LOINC and SNOMED, using the GPS subset that is free to use, because we're very conscious of having very low barriers to adaption, this being an open source app. And this implementation guide we also put on the so-called COCOS platform that was put up by the Health Innovation Hub. It's another collaborative effort to share data standards used for collecting COVID data in Germany, to have everybody sort of pull in the same direction. Dealing with these various aspects, and in part with some tension between them, of course we had to be very conscious of how to proceed. Coordinating changes was of course very important. If we have medical input, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with constraints coming from developing the app itself or the data? And I think actually here having FHIR as sort of a central discussion format or base format was very helpful, because it brings a certain natural precision that helps surface a lot of issues that might otherwise have come later, so allowing us to clear this out quite quickly. And of course, it is extremely important here that we could have very open and active discussions with our partners, ask if there are new medical input, how do we understand this, how should this be coded, what are we really after. It was very nice to see that LOINC and SNOMED put out COVID-19 codes very early on, so we used that. Given that there were so many parallel efforts, different apps, systems being built, I guess we don't have a perfect convergence on using exactly the same codes. So I think there are some cases where both LOINC and SNOMED could be used in some context. But I think we actually got a pretty good convergence, enough that we will be able to map back and forth, say, between our data and that's collected by other systems. Technically, on the FHIR side, so a number of things that turned out to be very important for us. One thing was that we, from the very beginning, were in a multi-language setting. So we had questionnaires in both English and German, and therefore had to have both those languages in the underlying artifacts. One thing we started using was the code system supplements that allows adding translations for existing codes. A very useful thing and a nice addition in FHIR-4. Versioning of our artifacts, like the questionnaires, was also something that became quite important, again, because things were developing. We had to make changes to the system while already running those systems. So we used semantic versioning to really understand how big are the changes in the data, are they breaking changes, to be able to have a clear overview of what we were collecting. What we did was very front-end focused, also the FHIR handling. And for Data for Life, that comes in part from a strong emphasis on data privacy, which means that we have an end-to-end encrypted platform. So we have to do the heavy lifting in the front end. And obviously, that means that there's more work to do yourself in that environment, TypeScript and JavaScript, as opposed to a typical backend with Java or .NET. We also built up a sort of a tool chain to deal with these various FHIR artifacts and the different variations of them. It ended up being a mixture of existing tools like the validator, that of course also does mapping between FHIR versions and so on, and some custom bits of JavaScript functionality. And that kind of mix turned out to be quite well suited for this environment where really the tool chain in part had to move as fast as the applications we were developing, and of course fit very well into this web app development environment. A big focus here for us was being able to have different variations of resources remaining consistent. So for instance, like I mentioned, we had resources in different languages. We also had parts still on STU3 and parts that were on R4 and so on. So we used the tool chain also to generate all these variations from a single non-redundant set of our 4 resources. Some of the components we built for this, I listed here. We did things like very simple templating for questionnaires to be allowed to, or to be able to support multiple languages. We also did our own value set expansion to use the code set supplements and use that to support the multi-language handling. And did some minor things like packing value sets into questionnaires and standard manipulations. And that basically was all I wanted to tell you about. You can obviously reach out to me. I'm here for the conference, so you can contact me on the Hoover app. Otherwise, I'm also on the Zulip FHIR community chat. Great fan of that. I included some links in the slides to some of the resources I mentioned. But for now, I think I will say thank you very much for your time and attention, and open for questions.
Hello, everybody.
Hi. Well, great video. A lot to put into 11 minutes, but you great. Before you wanted to show the links at the end of the slideshow, but before we move to that, there are 2 questions. You probably have them on your screen as well, if I'm right.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, everybody. So let me just check. Okay, I'll just take them from the top. So one question here I see: what was the additional value brought in by using the implementation guide formalisms? Were there consumers that could actually read it, either human or C, from its native format? So I think for it's a good question. I think for us, I think the primary value was about maybe not machine read, but just having a very clear documentation of what we were actually asking and outputting, because this was an open source app. So I know the app was picked up in a number of countries. So I think actually in the slideshow there was a Burmese version of the app. I can't tell for sure how many people used the implementation guide, but certainly, I mean, I think the main value, I think maybe we're not that people could sort of take it as a whole into a technical system, but certainly if they were, I think was, well, maybe they can't, but I think the main value is provide us like together with the open source, so people knew exactly what they were and could take it, and if they had some FHIR infrastructure, or they had even building out from scratch, they had a clear definition of what it was. So I think, and actually I think the text part of the implementation is also important to describe what is it actually we're asking, what are the value sets, what is the meaning of everything. So I think that is also valid beyond the sort of pure technical aspect. Right. So that was one. How do you deal with partners? Were they ready to work with FHIR, or did they need help? So I think in this collaboration for the COVAB guide, there was sort of a split of responsibility. So the FHIR, technical FHIR work was done. So I did worked on the IG and worked with sort of FHIR experts. So some of the people who were involved were definitely experts in that. Some of them, I think, for the more medical side, or the pure, let's say, developing side, did not have that much exposure to it. But we, so there, I think we had mainly the sort of trying to, we're just mainly not, I think they didn't have to use that much, have that much knowledge. We were trying to sort of just have the conversation at the sort of level of the let's say the domain specific, so the medical questions, and try to meet at the edge, as it were. So not everyone knew a lot of FHIR involved. So I was trying to sort of coordinate the various parts, but I think it worked quite fine as long as there's somebody who could do the translation and knew who to talk to. But it's interesting to see, like in our organization, definitely the knowledge of FHIR from, say, developers who are working with it now, of course, is going up because they see it more and more, which is very nice. But it wasn't like that in the beginning, and I think it's still okay. I mean, certainly having something in, say, okay, so JSON format here, most developers so on could go on work with it quite directly. Okay, so can you just get the main components of your tool chain? Maybe what was most helpful, right? So I should say, so again, it was a very sort of sparse tool chain. So it wasn't that we built up really, really big things, but so basically, like I said, the main concern we had was that we had different applications. We had things in different languages. We had something in STU3, things in R4. And the main question was the basic consistency of these things. So what we had was sort of a cascade of steps happening. So it came from, we had questionnaires that we used, had our own template format to allow to replace certain strings. And we had code systems and basic value sets that were not expanded. And then the first step then would be fill in the templates in the different languages for value sets and for the questionnaires. Then we did expansions of the value sets in the different languages. So that's the next step. Then we had also created versions where we actually packed the value sets that you needed together with the questionnaire. So you have it all in one resource that's contained resources. And then we did mapping. So this was all in R4, and then we mapped to STU3 to also have those. So it's sort of a cascade of things starting from a small core set and then expanding. So the mapping was done with the validator, the send a jar command line. So we just tied that in. We were doing it all, like I said, very, very quickly, sort of JavaScript tying it together. And Grunt, which is a task running system. And then things like the expansion with the code system supplement was something we built in, and the templating, which is a very minimal, was something we did. So it was sort of very small micro components that we just strung together as we were going along, basically. So also very focused on what we were doing, but sort of developing really along with the code as we got more and more resources and so on. Did you rely on some sort of automation to test or distribute the specification? So not really. I said, well, I guess that's right. Actually, so we used Simplifier to put it so that to use it to publish it. So that has a built-in validation for the resources. So we also had maybe I can actually try to show what the guide looks like. So that actually has built in. Sorry, no, hang on, I can't find the right screen. So let me stop that. But so that has built-in validation for that, and for the examples and so on, and checks for certain consistencies. But beyond that, that was sort of, so we had what was built into that tool, but that was by and large it. I mean, we also, I should say, part of what we also do on the developing side is we use a validator to validate all their examples against the profiles and the questionnaires and so on we had. So that we also, in the development phase, we also used that to basically check that all the profiles, all the examples were consistent with the profiles, and before pushing it. Okay. Do you think that the partners will be more likely? Oh, sorry, there was a question, I guess it disappeared. Do you think the partner will be more likely to adopt FHIR for future projects as a result of this activity? That's a very good question. I mean, I think it definitely makes a difference to see this sort of work in practice. I think time will show, but I mean, for us, certainly means that in everything we do with FHIR, we've been able to build on what we have. So, I mean, we as an organization, we used FHIR before, so that was, in that sense, for us was nothing new, but it certainly has helped us expand the basis and get into new parts and take that to a new level of some technical level within our organization. I mean, I hope, and also with the I think also with the partners we work to see that it works. I hope that will also have an impact, but I guess that's yeah. I mean, how far it penetrates, of course, it depends on how easy it is to integrate into their own system. That's something that's slightly outside our own our reach. But they were definitely happy to go in with this, and we're happy to support with the implementation guide, and we're all in on this for this project. So that was definitely very encouraging, and it's a good sign for FHIR.
All right, thank you very much for answering all the questions. I'm gonna have to stop you here because we ran out of time. Well, very nice presentation, very clear answers to the questions.